When it comes to action figures at market, there's really two types. The first being those that are licensed from content, movies and TV. Things like the hit Waterworld action figure line with Kevin Costner fins, or Super Mario's Brothers, the movie. I mean, who can forget that toy line? The other type are the homegrown product lines. These are ones that toy companies come up with and hopefully don't sell off to different large conglomerates when they need to make bonuses for the 15th floor. And some IP fades, some get stronger as years go by. Probably one of the most famous, of course, is G.I. Joe, created by Hasbro, or of course Food Fighters, created by Mattel, which is probably due for a comeback. I mean, Mattel has been really great about bringing back old IP. Look at what they're doing with Street Sharks. I think that's fantastic that they're digging deep and bringing back unreleased figures. Now, let's say you, though, want to go for a licensed product, not one that the toy company creates. Something like, oh, I don't know, have you ever heard of Star Wars? In order to get that, you'd have to make a presentation to the IP owners. It used to be Lucasfilm, now it's Disney, Lucasfilm being a division of them. But the point is when you're pitching for IP, not every IP is equal. And I don't mean in terms of how well they sell, I mean in how well or what techniques the studios use, what strategies they use when working together with a toy company. Ideally, it's a partnership that everyone comes together, and some movies, like things like Avengers, people are going to really fight over. Other things like Valerian, the studio is going to kind of hope you take. The point is, regardless of what it is, if you're trying to get IP to make toys of, it's a partnership with the studio. The first thing you're hopefully going to get to do is read the script. But as I said, not every studio is the same. Some studios have heavy redactions on the scripts because, well, they don't want things to leak out. So oftentimes when we're reading a script, there'll be things gone. For example, with Batman and Superman, the entire, I think, last 15 pages were not included. We were given scripts and they just sort of stopped because they didn't want us to know the super secret finale. Other times, and working with the exact same studio, in this case Warner Brothers, on the Green Lantern movie, we were given the entire script from start to finish. So where does the disconnect happen between studios and toy companies to toy shelf? A big part of that is the fact that toy production has to start 3 years before a toy hits the shelf. And at that time, movies aren't exactly that far along. So sometimes things pop out, sneak out, that aren't in the movie, like the Anakin Skywalker color change lightsaber or the Smart Hulk bursting out of the Hulkbuster armor. These are both examples of things that were in the original script, but didn't make it into the final movie. But because the toy makers are designing product this early on in the movie-making process, well, things that wind up getting cut and left on the, proverbial cutting room floor often make it into the toy line. So it isn't usually until years after the movie that you get the movie-accurate versions of things. Now, another issue is reference. Besides the script, there's a lot of concept art, there's early photos. Now, one of the most notorious examples of this is the blue Snaggletooth from the original Kenner line from the 80s. Everyone who knows the blue one that came in the Sears Cantina Adventure set was not correct to the movie. And this is because Kenner was given a very grainy black and white shot of the alien that they were going to reference to make the toy out of. They had no idea that he was wearing red and that he was short. They just made the assumption he was blue and tall. So it wasn't until after the movie came out that this figure then had to be retooled and remade. They just used the head again, but a lot of parts, like the legs, obviously, had to be redone. And he had to get a new paint job to make him accurate. It's a perfect example of early reference. Now, sometimes studios will actually invite you to the set, and you actually get to go to Hollywood, or usually Canada, or New Orleans, or Atlanta, where movies are actually filmed, unless you're on the Universal Studios backlot tour. But yeah, most movies aren't actually made in Hollywood these days. And while you can't bring your camera, sometimes you can get behind-the-scenes shots and, hang out with your favorite star. But for the most part, you're there to sketch or talk. You can't actually photograph because, well, things are super secret. They don't obviously want things to leak, and if they allow people on the film set, even toy makers, to start taking photos, it messes things up. Case in point, with Star Wars, they're notorious for using code names for their toys. This is in order to further prevent leaks from happening. Not every studio does this. As I said, they're all different. So, for example, Rey, with picking up the blue lightsaber, that whole big surprise that was held back, or With Rogue One, I remember very distinctly the code names were the Seals and the Sharks, kind of like West Side Story, but sort of not. In other words, this character was codenamed Shark Trooper. The Rebels were the Seals and the Imperials were the Sharks. Although Chewbacca's code name from Episode 7 was Alien Sidekick, probably not the best hidden nickname. So exactly who is in charge? Is it the studios? Is it the toy makers? Well, it's supposed to be a partnership, but the IP owner is always going to trump the toy company because, well, this is the way. And when it comes to certain brands, they take more efforts to keep things secure than others. While you'll have some studios willing to share everything with you, others will more or less dictate exactly what the toy line is going to look like. Lucasfilm is notorious for this, telling different toy companies, hey, you're either going to include Rey or you're not. And that's actually where the whole Where's Rey thing came from Episode 7. People complaining that there weren't enough Reys available at launch. Well, that's really not on the toy companies. So, for example, the notorious issue of her not being in the Monopoly set where a cute, adorable little girl wrote a letter asking why she wasn't included, it was because, in a lot of cases, Lucasfilm asked the toy companies not to release her. In the case of Jax, when I was working on the Big Figs line, they wanted us to hold her back for an all-female line they had planned. This turned into Forces of Destiny, but it meant we had this Rey sculpt that we couldn't release until Rogue One. It just literally sat. The idea was to have her out at launch, but request from Lucasfilm was to hold her back in anticipation of a potential all-female end cap at Target. That never happened. So yeah, the road to partnership between studios and toy companies is windy and bizarre. Any movie is like that. I mean, you basically strap yourself to a rocket and hope that the project takes off. There are way more duds and bombs than there are hits, but the hits tend to pay for the bombs, and this is in the toy aisle as well. So for every toy line that doesn't succeed, hopefully you have another one, like something like Coneheads, that flies off the shelf and becomes part of pop culture for, okay, I can't keep that up forever. The point is, Chewbacca is known as Alien Sidekick, and if that doesn't tell you everything about the security that studios have around new movies, well, I don't know what else will. High tide lifts all boats, and when everything can come together and the studio and the toy company can work together in harmony, it's fantastic. I hope this video was a little insightful about how certain studios and certain projects get shared more and some shared less. It really all depends on the studio and the project. If you have any questions or want to follow up to this, let me know in the comments below. I'm always happy to answer questions, and I appreciate you sharing this video. It's the best way to show support for this channel.